Rashod Bateman was reportedly almost traded before his extension. We talk about the wild new details from an NFL insider and so much more coming up on this bonus edition of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I am your host, Kevin Oestreicher, Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much for being here, making Locked On Ravens a part of your day and your first listen each and every single day. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms, including in video form on YouTube, where you can like and subscribe to the channel, as in audio form where you can follow along and subscribe wherever you get your podcast for 5 days a week here on Locked On Ravens, Monday through Friday. But we do have bonus episodes like this one and like the one we had yesterday when there are headlines that permit. We also go live after every single Ravens game, after every piece of Ravens big news. And also we have a lot more coming your way this upcoming year, this upcoming season on Locked On Ravens. And today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Happy Sunday, everybody. Another week on the horizon. Hopefully everybody's weekend has been good so far, and hopefully everybody is ending it strong here. We're doing another bonus episode. I had kind of teased on yesterday's bonus episode, and if you haven't checked that out, be sure to go check that out. We talked about Lamar Jackson not being able to escape Mike Florio and Florio's latest comments on Lamar. But I had said, hey, if there's another wild headline that drops, then we're going to talk about that on a bonus episode. And alas, here we are today doing a bonus episode. Jeremy Fowler of ESPN reported some pretty wild new Ravens details that we're going to go over. Apparently, according to him, Rashod Bateman was almost traded before his extension got done. So we'll talk about that in the first part of the show. We'll get into exciting trends from OTAs in the second part of the show, and then we'll round it out with some general Ravens news, notes, and quotes. And for those who have been tuning in every day for a while, first of all, thank you for doing so. If you've been tuning in for a while, you know that news, notes, and quotes was a staple back in the day on Locked On Ravens. But also, if you're a new listener, thank you as well. And if you're somewhere in the middle of an everyday or a new listener, thank you for your support and for tuning in too. So let's dive into it here. Jeremy Fowler of ESPN with some details here. Again, over on NFL Live, Jeremy Fowler saying that Rashod Bateman was almost dealt. And I know that, you know, when you hear this stuff, you, I guess, have to take it with a grain of salt if there is no like confirmation or whatnot. So I'm just going to essentially give the spark notes on what Jeremy Fowler said here on his segment during NFL Live, or this segment of NFL Live. So essentially, Rashod Bateman in the offseason went to the Ravens and asked for a new deal. He wanted a new contract. And the Ravens, according to Jeremy Fowler, essentially said no and gave Bateman permission to seek a trade, go feel out his market, essentially. And he did that. And there was interest. Apparently, the Cowboys, and we talked about that a little bit a couple weeks ago, the Cowboys were interested and involved, the Patriots, the Packers. Those teams are the teams that Jeremy Fowler named as teams that were involved in the situation. And so apparently, you know, Bateman had interest. He saw his market. The Ravens saw Bateman had a market and decided at that point to give him a new deal. There's been a lot of controversy about these points that Jeremy Fowler has made. A lot of people do not believe that this happened. And again, there's been no we might never know if it ever happened or not, right? I guess it's probably just up for interpretation. It does seem interesting with the timeline of events that we did, again, a couple weeks ago, get the news that Dallas was interested in Rashod Bateman for trading for Rashod. And you know, the whole storyline there was essentially, hey, Eric DeCosta shut that down, right? That was the big thing that everybody was talking about. But now it's like the other way around, essentially, where, was Bateman actually putting out feelers for a market with teams? Like, was that actually what's going on there? So, look, the Cowboys' interest has been reported on multiple different occasions. So I think it's probably pretty safe to assume that regardless of, you know, which side of the story is actually real, that the Cowboys probably did have some level of interest in Rashod. And look, I do not blame them here. They have their situation with George Pickens. Now the Patriots obviously looking for another receiver to pair with Drake May and Stephon Diggs and you know, trying to figure out the wide receiver room there. And then the Packers were a team that I thought was going to honestly take Rashod Bateman back in that 2021 draft. They did not. And they've been looking for, Bateman's not a vet by any standard, but like he'd be a vet in that wide receiver room because they're all so young there, at least one of the vets. So I don't really know because it just doesn't make sense for the Ravens to trade Rashod Bateman here. And I get that, in this case, the order of events makes sense that Jeremy Fowler is portraying here, but I don't know why Baltimore would be interested in moving off of him unless they were getting back another piece that could help them. So again, I don't know if the story is true or not. Obviously, here on Locked on Ravens, we talk about the points that are reported, and then hey, we can have opinions on those. We can try to put two and two together and figure it out. But Jeremy Fowler reporting here that the Ravens essentially said no to a contract, and I don't know whether that was I don't know if the Ravens said no. Was that because Bateman was asking for something? And Bateman tweeted. What did he tweet? It was like a month or so ago. He might. I'm trying to look it up right now here. Bateman tweeted something like "Know your worth" or something along those lines. At least I remember something like that happening. Bateman. He's someone, and we didn't really know what that was about. Yeah, I see someone here on social media said Bateman definitely tweeted "Know your worth" like a month ago. So It's tough because to me, it doesn't make sense why the Ravens would want to actually trade Rashod Bateman away. They are competing for a Super Bowl. Rashod Bateman, he's a big piece of that offense, right? Like, why would you move him? And let's say it was for a mid-round draft pick. Like, that doesn't help you win a Super Bowl this year. It just objectively does not. Now, maybe this was earlier in the offseason that Bateman felt out his market. And so if it was for a mid-round draft pick, that would have been in this year's class. So I guess that timeline of events makes more sense. But here we go. I'm looking it up now. I see it. Rashod Bateman, April 15th. So I guess about 2 months ago, tweeted out, "Know your worth. Know your worth." And no one knew what it was about. No one knew what it was about. We kind of talked about it here on Locked on Ravens, I remember, and I was kind of wondering. And with these tweets that really have no context, you can never assume it's about football, right? These guys tweet out stuff all the time, and sometimes they literally just do it to rile people up. Marlon Humphrey, he loves taking his social media and riling some people up sometimes. So I don't want to take those at face value and say, "Oh, Rashod was asking for a new deal." But with this, this is April 5th here. Or April 15th, excuse me, that does make a little sense there. So again, I know there are a lot of people that believe what Jeremy Fowler's saying. There are a lot of people that do not believe what Jeremy Fowler's saying. I really don't know what side of the fence I fall on right now, because I think the order of events makes sense, but I just can't get over the fact that why would Baltimore even play that card with Rashod, right? He was on the best deal in football. I still think he is on the best deal in football, even if he didn't sign the deal or the deal was worth more than what he actually got. I would have still said Bateman was on the best deal in football if he had signed a 3-year, $45 million deal. Still, Bateman is getting paid a lot less than guys that aren't as good as him. They're getting paid a lot more. So the teams make sense. The fact that Bateman asked for a new deal makes sense. I believe Bateman did want that security, especially after having the whole 5th-year option debacle happen. So that, in my opinion, also makes a lot of sense, where, he didn't want to have something fall through again. And if something happens, he would have missed out on even more money. So he essentially took the safe route, still got a really big payday and a nice payday. But, at this point, the Ravens trading Bateman makes no sense. I mean, it makes absolutely no, unless they were getting back a George Pickens level player. And again, off the field, we can talk about Pickens and whatever, with the behavior issues and whatnot. But unless you were getting back something that could help you this season, it makes no sense. Now, again, what I said earlier of if it was before the draft, yeah, sure. All right. That makes a little more sense here. But I just feel what was Bateman asking for? I just keep going back to that here. If the Ravens said no, what was he asking for that, made the Ravens say no like that? Because, all offseason, it was kind of, I never expected him to sign a deal because I thought that he could get so much more value this year if he stayed healthy and had another great year. He could have made a lot more money. So I think, this worked out for all sides, whether this report from Jeremy Fowler is true or not. I'm just more shocked at this. Like, Jeremy Fowler is a respected reporter over at ESPN, right? He's covered the NFL for many, many years and, has had a prominent role in NFL media for many, many years. So, it's not like just some guy coming out with his first ever report here, right? Jeremy Fowler is very, very respected. And you look at this here where I'm glad it worked out this way. I would have been pretty devastated if the Ravens had moved on from Rashod Bateman after, they did right by him here with this extension. It would have essentially, in my eyes, done him pretty dirty to move on from him like that. So I'm glad that didn't happen. But I guess, reports can be reports. It can be true or not true. But what is true is Rashod Bateman is still a member of the Baltimore Ravens. And coming up with the second part of the show, we'll talk about exciting trends from OTAs. The Ravens are wrapping up OTAs coming up this week. So we'll talk about what we've seen so far and what we've heard so far. Plenty coming your way on Locked On Ravens. First, the show is brought to you by Monarch Money. If you've ever checked your bank account and wondered where my money go, you are not alone. Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is easy to lose track. I have been there. That's where Monarch Money comes in. Your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Now, Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building your wealth. Now, managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. I love this aspect about Monarch Money. You can track shared and personal accounts. You can set goals and stay on the same page without the stress. And when I started using Monarch, I realized how much I was spending on a lot of things I really did not know I was spending a lot of money on. But now I'm able to budget smarter and save more money. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNFL at monarchmoney.com, 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. Again, that's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNFL for half off your first year. We return on Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here. We talked about the Jeremy Fowler pretty wild report of the Ravens apparently almost trading Rashod Bateman away before his extension, that getting to a point where apparently he was, gauging his market. Teams were interested. So, man, just overall pretty crazy story there. And I want to dive a little bit more into that just quickly before we get into the exciting trends from OTAs. Bateman has been such a hard worker to get back to this point. I just want to talk about this for a little bit here, right? He went through the ringer in terms of injuries and having a lot of this fan base be down on him and, not have his back. And he certainly felt that, he understood the pressure on himself, and he went out there and had an incredible season last year. And, he's someone that in that wide receiver room just makes so much sense for the Ravens with his skill set. He's become a reliable player for them, a 3-level receiver, someone who, he and Lamar Jackson have established that chemistry together, which is what everybody wanted. And so with this report here, again, like the order of operations makes sense, right? The timelines make sense. The details make sense. But, the Ravens trading Bateman, that does not make sense to me. It doesn't. So look, like I said at the end of the first segment, reports can be reports, but Bateman's in Baltimore. That's all that matters. And we can move on knowing that he is in Baltimore for 5 years, or at least is under contract for 5 years, which I'm really excited about here. But let's get into some exciting trends from OTAs here. Obviously, I think the first one that, kind of doing a little bit of a recap session here and things that I'm hoping to see this upcoming week as well. Attendance is always a big thing, and I will continue to be on the hill of voluntary means voluntary. I'm not going to bash anybody for not being there, but a lot of guys showed up during the first week. It was a big deal. Lamar and Derrick Henry and Kyle Hamilton and like your star players are all there. They essentially almost had a full team OTA that was open to the media, and everybody was there essentially. Just a couple of guys were not. And so, you see the attendance drop off this past week, which honestly was understandable and what I was expecting. But the message is clear here, right? The exciting trend to me is that this team, not that I knew that they wanted to win, but you could really tell like the messaging, and we've heard it before, right? We've heard this team talk it up and then unfortunately fall on their face in the playoffs. But I hope this is the last fire that they have had fueled. We talk about their revenge seasons. It feels like we're on like revenge season number 5 at this point in the Lamar Jackson era. At some point you just got to do the thing, right? But they're saying the right stuff. And I think that it's not just they're saying the right stuff. Like, some of these guys are coming in to camp, just, body transformation. These guys worked hard all offseason. I mean, Odafe Owe being the biggest one who added that 15 to 20 pounds, like that's a big deal. Nate Wiggins talked about adding 10 pounds. Mark Andrews went to Derrick Henry for some offseason workout and body transformation advice. And all of that combined with the hard work that I know these guys put in this offseason, some documented, some not documented. It seems to happen every offseason with these guys where some players will document their offseason training, others will not. There's not a right or wrong approach to that. But, I think when people can see it happening, that's when you're like, oh, that guy's working hard. But then if a guy doesn't post, he's like, oh, is this guy really working? No, everybody's working in the offseason. But, the will to win is there. They just have to execute. I also think guys getting back healthy is big. Keaton Mitchell is someone we talked about on the bonus episode yesterday, right? Him being pretty much back, and he hit that speed of 22.4 miles per hour, he said earlier in the offseason, which is a really exciting deal. He wants to be an impact player as a kick returner. That's a big thing to me where, Zay Flowers says his knee's 100%. He's feeling good. They missed him in the playoffs last year, at least in that Buffalo game. So, you can never, there are no guarantees with injuries, right? You can have a healthy year, you can have an injury depleted year. The Ravens have gone through both recently. They've had 2 really good years injury-wise these past 2, and knock on wood, there can be a third, and there will not be another injury-riddled year. I don't think that'd be great for anybody. But they've also gone through those injury-depleted years. They lose their entire running back room before week 1 in 2021. And, you have to pivot to a lot of different other things. Like, it's tough to go through that. And the Ravens luckily have not. But getting their roster healthy, obviously our Derrick going down is a blow. But, your team is going to have injuries. It's football. It's just a matter of how many you sustain. And the Ravens, honestly, Lamar Jackson aside and a couple other key position guys like Kyle Hamilton aside, you are pretty well set up to withstand injuries this season. Now, that depth can get tested with the snap of a finger, blink of an eye, right? You can get that depth tested, and it's not great. But for Baltimore, the depth is great. You got the star power. You got the young players. You got the vet depth as well. I really like where their roster is at. And part of that is because I really like their rookie class this year. Look, I didn't love every pick of it, but I think for the majority, look, everybody's excited about Malaki Starks. He's already making an impact. That's a great, exciting trend. He's already getting his hands on footballs, forcing turnovers, wreaking havoc. He and Kyle Hamilton, I have very high expectations for. I also have very high expectations for Mike Green in this defense, where obviously you look at his on-field production, it was there at Marshall. And him being a top 15 consensus player, some experts had him in their top 10. I had him in my top 12, so I was kind of in the middle. Not edge rushers, like players, all positions. Like he was that good, and he is that good. And the Ravens getting him in the second round, at the end of the second round, obviously there were reasons he fell. Teams didn't trust the off-field stuff, and the Ravens clearly felt confident enough to do it. But, you have a player that, to me, every team in the AFC North has their guy now. TJ Watt, Pittsburgh, Myles Garrett, Cleveland, Trey Hendrickson for now. We don't know what's going to happen there. Trey Hendrickson for now in Cincinnati. I truly think Mike Green, with the right development, with the right coaching and being put in the right opportunities, his skill set will do the rest, and he could be that next great AFC North pass rusher. I truly do believe that. Another big exciting trend for me, outside of the extensions with Derrick Henry and Rashod Bateman, is looking at how the offensive line has taken shape here. And I think, there's only so much you can take away from OTAs, which obviously you're not going to have that contact. Really, the real takeaways for the O-line and D-line begin when the pads come on and you're able to get that contact. But, I'm excited about Baltimore's O-line because I think it's the make or break of the team. And that usually is how it goes with a lot of teams. But, you have Stanley, Linderbaum, and Rosengarten, right? You are set at those 3 spots. What is going to happen with those guard spots? It feels like Daniel Falele is locked into the right guard spot. Not necessarily sure I agree with that, but it feels like that's the reality we're in here. And then it seems like Andrew Voorhees is getting those snaps here early on at left guard, but there's going to be a competition, right? Ben Cleveland is back, which still is maybe one of the more shocking moves of the offseason. But, you kind of break it down and makes sense. There probably wasn't a lot of opportunities for him, especially after his offseason trouble he got in and, felt like Baltimore's really his only option. But then could Emory Jones make a run at it? So offensive line, I'm excited for that. I'm also excited for Lamar to be their starting quarterback because Cooper Rush has not been it so far this offseason. He's had a couple of rough days. Apparently, Mark Andrews got pretty fed up with him getting missed in the end zone a couple times. So Lamar Jackson, please, 17 games plus playoffs, health. Everybody here is hoping and praying for that. And yeah, really important that Lamar stays healthy. But everybody knows that. Coming up in the final part of the show, we'll continue talking about exciting trends from OTAs and get into some more news, notes, and quotes, including from Chuck Pagano, who is back in Baltimore. So be sure to stay tuned. A lot coming up on the show. Back here, Locked On Ravens, Kevin Oestreicher here on a Sunday. Yes, a Sunday. We are Monday through Friday on Locked On Ravens. That's the regular show, but we sometimes do have bonus episodes when the headlines permit. And we had that today, as apparently Rashod Bateman was almost traded. Jeremy Fowler reporting that over on NFL Live. So had to talk about that. But it's also fun to just talk Ravens football, and that's what I do here every single weekday, plus those bonus episodes, live shows. We're building a great community here on Locked On Ravens. We already have one, and we're continuing to add to it. So in audio form, video form, social media, subtext, really appreciate everybody for tuning in, showing their support, and making me a little part of your day, and that means a lot to me. So let's continue diving into some OTAs here. I'm excited to see, and this is not necessarily something that has happened. I mean, there have been impact plays here, but I'm excited to see who steps up with our Darius Washington going down. We heard Zach Orr talk about Jalen Member Davis. He's getting some reps at safety. Bill Braid's been making some plays, and you see Kane is in there as well. Our Darius is he's not a Kyle Hamilton important piece or a Roquan Smith important piece, but he came up big and clutch in a lot of moments for them last season, a lot of moments for this Ravens team. So you're going to have to replace that production somewhere. It feels more and more like they will go internal. I still would like him to sign a vet, even if it's not the Justin Simmons of the world or Julian Blackmon of the world, even just a lower level, could be a minimum contract guy. Just to have the vet presence there. I think the Ravens got caught really in a bad spot last year. In fact, we know that they were, where their vet depth was exhausted and their guys just weren't performing well, and they really didn't have a ton of other options once they exhausted like the one other option they had. And they finally got to the only legitimate option they had left. It was the last-ditch effort, move our Darius back, and it worked. But to me, the way you can avoid that mistake is just having as much depth as possible. And it's not that the Ravens didn't try to have that last season. They clearly did, and I don't think anybody expected Marcus Williams to be as bad as he was. And Eddie Jackson, I expected more from. I didn't expect the world, but, Eddie was pretty bad for them last season. So just, hey, get your depth in. Doesn't hurt. If you have to cut a guy, you hope you can get him back on the practice squad. You don't want to get caught like that again this season, because it honestly cost them a couple games last year. It could have cost them more. Honestly, I know the NFL put out on social media yesterday that Lamar and Joe Burrow had 17 touchdowns combined in those two Ravens-Bengals games. The Ravens could have easily lost both those games. Easily. Evan McPherson doesn't miss that field goal, or the Ravens don't get a clutch turnover on Thursday night. Like, there were big opportunities for the Bengals to take both those games, and the reasoning was because the defense couldn't cover anything. So this year, it's hopefully going to be a lot better. I'm excited to see also Trenton Simpson hopefully grow and blossom. Teddy Buchanan pushing him for a spot potentially. That'll be a really exciting battle as well. So a lot of big, awesome storylines for the Ravens this year. I'm excited about this roster. I've said it here before. I think it's the best roster this team has had in the Lamar Jackson era. Maybe one of the best rosters this team has had ever. I know, look, that 2000 defense is the best defense ever, right? So you're not going to really touch that. That 2023 defense, not far behind in terms of stats, but that 2000 defense, man, that was something different. So, look, this Ravens defense this year going to be, I think, really good, but it's not going to touch that 2000s defense. Now, 2000s offense, man, you could do a lot to beat that 2000s offense, and that they had some good players on that, including former Ravens wide receiver Kaji Ismail, who does join us every single week here on Locked On Ravens. But hey, you know what? I think to me, you look at this roster up and down, it's looking really, really good. But it's not just the roster, it's the coaching staff too. I think John Harbaugh did a great job assembling his coaching staff, moving off of guys that weren't getting the job done. It just felt to me like it was methodical, in my opinion. And John Harbaugh, look, we know that this Ravens team is a coaching factory. And we saw the Ravens lose Chuck Pagano all those years ago to the Colts. Now he's back in Baltimore. He doesn't want to be a head coach again. He doesn't want to do it, but he is really excited to be back in Baltimore. He said some of his fondest memories and coaching moments were the first time he was here in Baltimore and being the secondary coach before his promotion to defensive coordinator. And so he said, as a head coach, you get pulled away from what you love doing, and that's coaching the game, right? So he's done with the head coaching aspect, but we know how this all developed. Chuck, obviously a super bright football mind, was doing some media work with the Pat McAfee show and got that call. And just, he was, I guess, kind of on and off thinking about it. That was, kind of the thing, but wasn't really, he was looking for the right opportunity, essentially, I think. And Harbaugh presented him with that opportunity. He said he never really stopped thinking about coaching the game, thinking about the game, and everybody apparently in his family, he said his kids, his wife, his daughters, they all thought that he retired too young. So now he's back in Baltimore, and he's going to help Zach Orr a lot. They obviously brought in Dean Pease last year to be kind of a mentor to Zach Orr. I think that helped. But Pagano in his role, I think, can really help take this Zach Orr defense to the next level. So again, super pumped about that. And this is a big year for Baltimore. I've said it many, many, many times. We've been in every dairy. You've heard me say it, and you're probably tired of me saying it. But this Ravens team is probably going to look a decent amount different next season, because, you probably can't pay both tight ends. If the Ravens have a disappointing year this year, which hopefully they don't, but if they do, John Harbaugh's probably out the door. And then what does that mean? I would probably just promote Todd Monken at that point, but, we'll have to see what happened there. Hopefully we don't have to, right? Hopefully the Ravens win the Super Bowl and Harbaugh can stay. And, I think that's a win-win for everybody, the people who like Harbaugh and the people that don't. I think if they win a Super Bowl, hey, they won a Super Bowl. Winning cures everything. So there are these teams you have to compete with, though, right? You got Kansas City. You got Buffalo. Cincinnati. Look, I'll be honest with you. I'm not very in on Cincinnati this year. I think they're going to regress, and the reason is their defense. They did nothing to adjust their defense this offseason that impressed me. They might lose Trey Hendrickson. Their offense is explosive. We know that, but their offensive line also is not great. Their team is essentially 4 players, and they might lose one of those players. It's Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Trey Hendrickson. That is their team. And that's not me speaking like, legitimately, if the Bengals were in a different division, if they weren't rivals with the Ravens, I would be saying the same thing, right? I'd be saying the same thing. Plus, I'm not a big Zach Taylor believer either. I don't know when this turned into a roast of the Bengals, but here we are. Steelers, I think the Steelers are still a bigger threat. I know a lot of people, they look at the Bengals and they see the big 3 on offense and they want to write the Steelers off. The Steelers signed Aaron Rodgers. I'm not big on that signing, but he's better than what they had. I think he will be better than what Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson was decent for them at times last year. But I think Rodgers, hot take maybe, will be better than Russell Wilson was for them last year. Still not enough to get him over the Ravens, right? I still think Baltimore, this is pretty easily their division to win, at least on paper, right? We don't know what happens till the season happens. But right now, I'd say the Ravens are the pretty heavy favorite there. But I just think Pittsburgh is better coached, and the roster is more well-rounded. And, I don't know. It feels like they're going to add somebody. They have to add somebody to that offense before the season starts. Moving off of George Pickens, that's a big blow to them. So, we'll see. And then the Browns are the Browns. I mean, yeah, the Browns are the Browns. We'll leave it at that there. So, yeah, man, this is kind of a roast of the AFC North to round out the show here. I don't hate it, not mad at it. But, again, you still got to play the games. Got a lot of respect for the Steelers, obviously, and what they've been able to do, even though they're a rival. It's hard for me to say that. And then, you obviously got the Bengals and the Browns that have not been on the Ravens and Steelers levels over the years, but got to play the games, got to win the games. And we saw last season that you cannot count any team out because the Browns beat Baltimore with Jameis Winston. That was a tough one. But that's all I have for you here today on this bonus episode edition of Locked On Ravens. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll be back here tomorrow with our regularly scheduled content talking about the Ravens, Lamar Jackson, and so much more. So be sure to stay tuned. And I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.